Who do you think the children of the divergence age might be? It's actually very interesting to look at youth populations, because if you went back to 1950, the vast majority of young people actually lived in what we now know as the developed countries. But at 100 years, it's a very different picture. They're all going to be living in the Asia Pacific, in Africa, and in the Latin American markets. So let's take a quick tour of the countries of the divergence. But we need tour guides for this. So I've picked 4. And just in case any of these are pictures of your own kids, I apologise, because yes, I did take them from Flickr. But there are 4 imaginary kids that you can imagine were born in '94. And they are Suming from Beijing, Vasily from Russia, Astrid from Sao Paulo, and Suresh from Mumbai. And let's join each 4 of them on a quick story about the world and the internet that they grew up with, so you can see how different it is from the worlds that we grew up in. So let's start with Suming. Let's first take a journey from Oslo, a city of a population, I believe, about 500,000, to Beijing, a city with a population of 13 million. And we can get a bit of a sense of the weird and wonderful super city that Suming has grown up in. Beijing is a city of incredible contrast. The first time I went there, I was astonished because I expected to see people in Mao suits riding bicycles. Couldn't have been further from the truth. And in fact, the internet in Beijing is a massive power of the way that ordinary people entertain themselves. In fact, you can see here that 60% of the people in the largest cities in China spend about 2/3 of their leisure time entirely on the internet. Now, for Suming, she didn't grow up with the internet the way we did. In fact, she spends most of her time accessing the internet in internet cafes. Now, these are dreadful places. I mean, they're the last place you'd want to send your children to hang out in. They're smoky, they're dark, the world's copyrights and entertainment trademarks are being serially infringed minute by minute. But they're also a hotbed of innovation where young Chinese kids get together to discover the internet. What's also interesting about Suming's experience of the web is that it really started off primarily as a form of entertainment. And you can see here, these are the numbers from 2007. The top 3 uses of the internet in China are online music, messaging, and watching, or rather stealing, movies and TV shows. Email is only used by 57% of people in China. Now, the 2009 numbers show a slight shift, because search now is in the top 3. But you can see here that email is still very low on the list. But even search in China is not like the way that we understand search in the West. In fact, a lot of fuss was made recently about Google's exit from China. And a lot of people heralded it as a sign of, free speech and global democracy. But I'd like you to consider the possibility that there was more to the story. In fact, Google, for some time, has been getting its ass kicked by Baidu. And the reason is this: they didn't understand how different it is to do business on the mainland. Baidu doesn't try to sell ads by algorithms and automatic credit card systems. They've got thousands of small, cheap salespeople spread throughout the country. The vast majority of people who buy ads on Baidu don't even have websites. They're a carpenter in a small regional area who's got a telephone. How does that carpenter work out whether AdWords is delivering a return on investment or not, or click-through rates? He doesn't care. All he knows is whether his phone rings or not. And if his phone rings more every month, he buys more ads on Baidu. It's as simple as that. But that shows you the difference, I think, in the operating cultures of the #1 search engine in China. One of the other search engines is something that sounds a little bit like a Swedish porn film. I'm talking about what the Chinese call the human flesh search engine. Now, what it refers to is the use of real people or bloggers to find out the truth. One of the best examples of this was during the Sichuan earthquake. People were not only sharing information on Twitter, what they were also doing was trying to find out what really happened, and believe me, they did. They discovered that only a handful of schools were responsible for the vast majority of the children's deaths, and those schools had officials that were bribed by local development companies. The bloggers uncovered this, and those people instantly stood trial. So it was the first example of bloggers having immense power in China over the media. Of course, being Chinese, they're also unrelenting capitalists, as only former communists could be. And this very enterprising bottled tea company immediately ran this ad. If you want to donate, ran the slogan, you donate 100 million RMB. If you want to drink, you drink Walsh. Now that sounds bizarre, but they became the #1 tea brand in China after running that campaign. Of course, the collective power of the Chinese bloggers can also get a little bit out of control. It might interest you to know that Avatar was banned recently in China. But it wasn't because it was American or pro-democratic. In fact, it had everything to do with this rather strange picture behind me. This is what they call a Chinese nail house, or a very stubborn landowner. They were actually planning on building a supermarket there. Now, in the good old days, when someone was going to do this, a big wrecking crew would arrive in the middle of the night with some very burly Chinese people and ask you politely to leave immediately. But the problem is that this landowner was not just stubborn, he was a blogger. And he wasn't just a blogger, he was one of the most famous bloggers in China. And he became a bit of a national hero because he refused to move. Now, when the Chinese saw the trailer for Avatar, they were astonished. They thought, amazing, the Americans know what's going on with our nail houses. Watch the trailer and you'll see why.
Because this little grey rock sells for 20 million a kilo. Their village happens to be resting on the richest deposit and they need to relocate. Those savages are threatening our whole operation. We're on the brink of war and you're supposed to be finding a diplomatic solution.
So the Chinese went, how is it that James Cameron knows about our development problems in Beijing? The Chinese government weren't amused. And in fact, they thought, we'll ban the movie. Then they thought, no, we can't do that. We'll just ban it in 3D. Because 3D is more likely to get people incensed. So if you want to watch Avatar in China, you can only watch it in the 2 dimensions. The other interesting factor, I think, about the world that Su-Ming grew up in is that the phones she used are very different to ours. Now, we might think the state-of-the-art technologies, things like the iPhone and the iPad. But you might be interested to know that for Su-Ming, one of the coolest phones is what they call bandit phones. A phone that sells for under $100, has not 1 but 2 SIM card slots, and has unlimited free video content on it. Now, this delightful device isn't made by Apple. It's in fact made by a small company in Shenzhen. They're exporting not just in China, but globally. In fact, you can buy them in Sao Paulo. The Chinese are now working throughout Latin America. In fact, this is Hugo Chavez behind me. He recently partnered with a company in China to release the cheapest phone in the world. It's a $15 cell phone that has Wi-Fi, MP3, that does everything. It's sold out within hours of launching in Venezuela. Bizarrely, Hugo called it the Vegetario, which sounds a bit like the word excellence in Spanish, but also unfortunately comes from the root Spanish word vega, meaning penis. So actually you could call this the penis phone, which wasn't lost on Hugo when he announced that this telephone will not only be the biggest seller in Venezuela but the world. Whoever doesn't have a Vegetario is nothing, implying a strange kind of castration if you're not an owner. He then, of course, called his mother on it immediately, which made it even more bizarre. But let's leave Su-Ming for a minute, because there's another BRIC